You know I love me a good budget PC case that tries to cram in a lot of features for not a lot of money. Of course, the cheaper the case, the more sacrifices are made, especially when it comes to some of the finer features a more expensive chassis might have, such as cable grommets, thicker steel construction, a front USB Type-C port, and most notably fans. Well, this right here is a Thermaltake S200. It's a mid-tower case that has a lot going for it for not a lot of money. Today I'll be going over what features the S200 has, what it's missing, and give you my opinion on whether or not you should give it a look for your next PC build. Welcome to the middle of nowhere. As any budget PC builder will tell you, trying to get the most bang for your buck when it comes to a case can be difficult. Sure, you might not spend a lot of money, but the question then becomes, what are you giving up, and will you end up spending more to overcome those deficiencies? The most common feature lacking in budget cases are fans. Either not enough are included, they don't push enough air, they're too loud, or they use Molex connectors. The S200 flips this stereotype on its head by including 3 fans, and they are all ARGB with standard 3-pin ARGB connectors. They also use 3-pin DC connections for power. Would I have preferred 4-pin PWM? Sure, but at least they aren't Molex. The fans are even daisy chainable, so you won't use up all the available fan and ARGB headers on your motherboard. Currently, you can find the S200 priced anywhere from $55 to $80. This puts it in a very competitive space and can turn some eyes for those looking to save money on a PC case. Did I mention it also has a tempered glass side panel? Accessory-wise, Thermaltake definitely went the minimum effort route in terms of storing the various screws and things. Everything is in one plastic bag, which is twist-tied to the fan and front I/O cables, and the manual is floating around the bottom of the case. I would have appreciated at least a cardboard box for the screws, and maybe even separate bags for each kind of screw. Yes, this would contribute to plastic waste more, but it would at least be nice to have something to kind of organize all the screws and other bits. I will say this about the manual, I like it. It's very thorough and very easy to read. Here's all what you get with the S200. The aforementioned manual, cable ties, a speaker. If your motherboard has a speaker header, you can hook this up and it will make beeps and things to let you know if everything is working or if there's trouble. And a baggie filled with screws for the power supply, hard drives, and standoffs. When it comes to dimensions, the S200 measures 460mm tall, 210mm wide, and 395mm deep. You can buy the case in black or white, and as previously mentioned, it has a tempered glass side panel and comes with 3 ARGB fans. Just from looking at the S200, you can tell it's not a very big case, and this will definitely come into play later when I talk about GPU compatibility. The tempered glass side panel is 3mm thick and has no tint to it. It does not travel the full height of the case, but rather stops at the power supply shroud, just like the Phanteks P368. The outer part does have a peel, but the inner does not, so be aware of that when handling it. The top and bottom of the glass panel have foam padding glued to it to help dampen vibrations, and at the sides are metal strips to aid with installation. Finally, there is a black border on all sides of the glass panel. The panel itself is held to the case with 2 thumb screws. These are not captive, so keep that in mind when building a PC with the S200, as you don't want to lose them. In fact, none of the thumb screws used to attach either side panel or the hard drive cage at the bottom are captive, and it's one of the first things I noticed. This is another cost-saving measure by Thermaltake, and it's one I wish they didn't take. Captive screws aren't that expensive, and using them, at least for the side panels, would have given the S200 just a bit more of a premium feel. The rear panel, as with most of the case, is made of metal. It's pretty easy to remove and reattach as well. Again, the thumb screws are not captive, so don't lose them. There is no sound dampening material on it, and I wouldn't describe the rear panel as the most rigid, as it has some flex to it. However, the case is fairly solid when everything is put in place. I'd originally thought the PCIe slot covers were reusable and held on by screws. Upon closer inspection when building in the S200, I found this to not be true. Instead, the PCIe covers are the one and done kind, usually found in cheaper cases. Considering the S200 normally sells for $80 or so, I would expect reusable PCIe covers. This is disappointing and definitely a strike against the S200. The entire case is held together with rivets, so for those who may be interested in taking the case apart to repaint it or mod it in some other way, you'll need a rivet gun to put it back together again. The S200 has a pretty standard I/O for a case of its cost. There are power and reset buttons, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, and separate headphone and mic jacks. If you were hoping for a USB Type-C port, you'll need to look elsewhere. If you desperately need a USB Type-C port in the front, one case I found at the S200's price range is the Montech Sky1 Lite. As far as dust filters go, the S200 has 2. One at the top held on with magnets, and the second is at the bottom. Here you can see Thermaltake going the super cheap route of opting for a flimsy filter sheet held on by metal teeth. This is the type of filter mechanism I'd expect in a $40 case, not one that normally costs $80. I'm definitely disappointed in how the bottom filter was implemented. It's not easy to get at for regular maintenance, nor is it easy to reattach without flipping the case on its side. As for the front panel, it seems Thermaltake is going the route many case makers are taking these days, and that's a front panel with small holes for ventilation that is fine enough to provide plenty of airflow and also act as a dust filter, negating the need for a separate filter altogether. The front panel is super easy to remove too. Just grab it at the bottom where there's a bit of a handle and pull. The entire panel is made of metal and plastic, and the case's I/O isn't attached to it, so it'll be very easy to clean. The case feet are plastic and lift the case roughly 0.6 inches or 1.2 centimeters off the ground. This should be enough room to allow the PSU to take in fresh air. The feet are lined with soft foam padding to help dampen vibrations and offer a bit of grip to help keep the case from unintentionally sliding across your desk. They are held on by Phillips head screws, so if you need to replace them or you want to mod them, you should be able to with ease. When it comes to motherboard support, you can fit ITX, MATX, and ATX motherboards up to 244mm into the S200. There's a nice sized cutout on the motherboard tray as well, so you'll be able to have access to the CPU bracket when the motherboard is mounted. 6 of the 9 standoffs for an ATX motherboard are pre-installed. Why Thermaltake did this is beyond me, as it will require you to install the remaining 3 standoffs. When you do install them, make sure you don't go too tight or you'll run the risk of stripping them. If you go the MATX or ITX route, you'll want to remove and reposition some of the standoffs. Thankfully, Thermaltake has stamped the motherboard tray with I, M, or A for each motherboard type, and stamped the letter next to the holes where you need to insert a standoff. The S200 supports up to 4 storage devices. There are 2 sleds on the side for 2 2.5-inch drives, and at the bottom is a cage where you can either put 2 3-point drives or 1 2.5 and 1 3.5-inch drive. To install drives, you'll need to remove the rear panel, unscrew the 2 thumb screws, remove the cage, and install your drives using the appropriate screws. The 2 thumb screws holding the cage to the case were extremely tight, so you may need a screwdriver to loosen them. There are also 2 positions you can set the drive cage to. Moving it forward will help to better accommodate longer power supplies, but be aware this may block front position 360mm radiators. If you don't need the cage at all, you can leave it out altogether to make room for your power supply cables. When it comes to GPU, CPU, cooler, and PSU support, in the S200 you can install GPUs up to 330mm in length, or 300 if you've positioned a radiator at the front. Definitely check your GPU's length before buying this case, as you could run into compatibility issues, especially with RTX 4000 series GPUs. You can install CPU coolers up to 166mm in height, which means a Vetru V5 at 148mm and Cooler Master Hyper 212 at 159mm will definitely fit, and a beefy Noctua NH-D15S at 165mm will just barely fit. Finally, you can install power supplies up to a length of 190mm, and you can insert the power supply by sliding it on the side and then screwing it down. I recommend removing the hard drive cage if you don't need it, so you have more room for cables, and if you don't mind the added cost, buy a semi or fully modular power supply for easier cable management. I'll be using the Thermaltake Smart BM2. It's a semi-modular power supply, and I'll be using it with the S200 for my next PC build, so get subscribed so you don't miss out on that video. The S200 supports a variety of fan and radiator configurations. You can place 320mm or 240mm fans in the front, 220mm or 240mm fans at the top, and 120mm fan at the back. As I mentioned early on, there are 320mm ARGB fans pre-installed in the front. These fans do top out at 1000 RPMs and have a dB rating of 22.3. 1000 RPMs isn't that high of a max speed, but hopefully they push enough air to keep the system cool. To aid in exhausting hot air, I definitely suggest investing in a rear fan. If you want to liquid cool your PC, you can install a 360, 240, or 120mm radiator at the front, a 240 or 120mm radiator at the top, and a 120mm radiator at the back. With all these options, trying to do a custom loop within the S200 shouldn't be impossible, but I recommend keeping it simple and sticking with an AIO, as there isn't much room for a pump and reservoir combo after you install the GPU unless it's short. You could get creative and put a reservoir distro plate where a rear fan would normally go, and then you could remove the hard drive cage and put a pump there. Then you'd probably just either have a single radiator at the top or one at the front and top. If you're into water cooling and you're committed to getting the S200, it's worth having a long think to see what kind of loop you could come up with. If all that sounds like too much work to you, stick with an AIO, either a 360 or 240mm one, depending on your CPU's cooling needs. When it comes to cable management, the S200 has 6 holes to route your cables through when using an ATX motherboard. There are 2 at the top, 2 at the side next to your motherboard and 2 on the PSU shroud. The only concern I might have with these holes is their size and how close they'll be to the motherboard once it's installed. There are also 2 cable routing holes covered by the 2.5-inch drive sleds. If you're not going to use the sleds and are installing a smaller motherboard, these holes will come in handy. Also, be aware that the 2 cable routing holes on the PSU shroud could get blocked by the power supply after it's installed, so you may want to pre-route your cables after installing the motherboard, but before you install the PSU. At the back, there is 3/4 of an inch or 1.9 centimeters of clearance from the motherboard tray to the back of the case. You can use this space and the 10 cable tie-down points to manage your cables and keep things tidy. As previously mentioned, make use of the space where the hard drive cage is if you don't intend to use it. The S200 does not have any cable grommets, but I don't really expect a case at this price point to have that feature. It's been a few days, and as you can see, I built a PC in the S200. Doing so was remarkably easy and I had almost no issues. Because the ASRock Pro 4 R2 is narrower than a standard ATX motherboard, I didn't need to populate the 3 side standoffs Thermaltake left out. Instead, I had to install only 1 extra standoff on the side closest to the PCIe covers, and I used the included standoff tool to install it. It makes sense to me now why Thermaltake left those 3 standoffs on the side uninstalled, as not all ATX motherboards are the same width. Cable management in the S200 was super easy, and I was right in stating you'll want to pre-route any bottom cables before installing the power supply, as it does interfere with the 2 cable holes on the PSU shroud. While the cables might fit, the plastic connector, such as that for the front audio jacks, might not fit after the power supply has been installed. Speaking of the cable routing holes, they are all well positioned and I didn't have any clearance issues at the top or side of the case, preventing me from easily routing and installing the EPS power cable or the 24-pin motherboard cable. Being able to reposition or remove the hard drive cage was helpful, as doing so gave me more room to work with. Finally, the cable tie-down points are well positioned and helpful, but I'd like to see an extra column of 3 added near the front of the case. I'd position them an inch or 2 behind where the frontmost tie-down points are. One thing to note, if you do buy the S200, I also recommend investing in a low-profile USB adapter for the front USB 3.2 Gen 1 cable. This will make your cable routing look so much better, but more importantly, because the front USB cable sticks out fairly far, routing it can be an issue. You can also run the risk of accidentally breaking the motherboard's USB 3 header if you pull the cable too tight when managing it. Additionally, if you have to install the cable on the bottom, it may come into conflict with the PSU shroud as it is so large. The low-profile adapter eliminates both of these issues. Regarding the included fans, they come with a 4-way splitter for the DC 3-pin connection, but the ARGB connections are daisy-chainable with a little pigtail to connect additional fans. I only mention this as connecting them in the right order might be important for lighting. At the motherboard's standard speed setting, the fans seem to push enough air while not being overly loud either. Their default color is a soft purple rather than RGB, as you can kind of see here, so we'll have to see how well they light things when I've installed Windows and ASRock Polychrome. Overall, building in the S200 was straightforward and easy, which is all you can ask for from a PC case. Thermaltake's decision to not use captive thumb screws for both side panels, the lack of reusable PCIe slot covers, and the poorly implemented bottom dust filter are really my only complaints with this case. These cost-saving measures should be reserved for a case that's probably less than $70 and not something that's normally retails for $80 or more. At that price point, the case is no longer budget in my mind, but has now entered the mid-range pricing tier of cases. Other than those gripes, I only have one concern, and that has to do with the S200's GPU support. Due to its size, the S200 cannot accommodate larger GPUs, and every new generation of GPU seems to be getting bigger and bigger. Being unable to hold GPUs longer than 330mm could potentially be a massive blocker to buyers, even more so than a lack of captive screws or reusable PCIe slot covers. And this leaves me with whether or not I recommend the Thermaltake S200. I recommend this PC case if you can buy it for less than $70. At this price or below, the included fans, the ease of cable management, and the other features present overshadow any compromises Thermaltake has made and make the S200 a case worth looking at. However, if you can only find the S200 for $80 or more, I don't recommend it. There are too many other PC cases at this price point with similar features to the S200, some of which are better implemented, and some of these cases have better GPU, PSU, and CPU cooler compatibility, such as the Fractal Design Focus 2 RGB. It comes with 240mm ARGB DC 3-pin fans, but more importantly, you can install GPUs up to 405mm in length, and it can hold larger power supplies and CPU coolers, compared to the S200. However, if none of those things are a concern for you, then definitely give the S200 a chance for your next PC build. And that's all I have to say about the Thermaltake S200 mid-tower PC case. What are your thoughts on it? What cases have recently caught your eye? Write a comment and let me know. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hit that like button if you liked this video or at least found it helpful. Feel free to share any questions or comments you have down below. Show your support for the channel by clicking subscribe, and don't forget to click that notification icon so you don't miss out on any future content. And hey, while you're here, stick around and check out some of the other videos I've made. I'm Seth, and I'll see you next time in the middle of nowhere.